and going. So I'd like to welcome you to my Blender game pipeline, the short version. A couple of disclaimers. The first one is that I'm not going to be going too in-depth into 3D modeling and how Unity works and all of that. What I want to do is give a basic overview so that both artists and programmers can sort of understand, the basics of, the workflow and where they can get resources from, things like that, and a little bit of the terminology. So first of all, I want to talk about the two elements that we're going to be working with today. One is 3D software, and the other one is a game engine. So let's start with 3D software. We use 3D software to create characters and environments and animations and rigs and all the good stuff that you create for your game. All of the content and the assets is created in 3D software. It can be used, we can use different ones like Maya and ZBrush and Substance Painter, or, we can use an in-one program such as Blender, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Blender is a free 3D program that basically does the entire 3D production pipeline suite, from 3D modeling to texturing to sculpting to animation and all of the things that go into creation for games and movies and TV and whatever you can imagine. It's recently become very, very, very much an asset to 3D creators. A game engine is basically what provides the environment for game creators to create their games. They put all of the assets and all of the game logic and all of those things into the game engine. And today we're going to be talking about Unity. Sorry to those who were expecting Unreal Engine. So that's my overview for that. So I want to talk a little bit about general render budget. And stopping, the stream ended. Okay, hang on a second. Okay, are we back? Can everyone see? Is everything fine? Wonderful. Okay, so let's continue. I want to talk a little bit about the general render budget and what that means. So every game basically has a certain amount of computing power based on whatever platform you're trying to output your game to. So let's have a look at what that means, and I'm going to try and narrow that down for you just a little bit. So the first thing we're going to talk about is poly count. What that means is how many polygons you have running in your game at one time. Okay, so for example, there is a difference between PC versus mobile games and how many polys they can take. So PC game can generally, a desktop can usually take a lot more punishment, so it can handle a lot more, whereas mobile will usually need a lower poly count so that the performance is better. But that again also depends on what kind of device you're running this on and all sorts of other things. I'm just giving you general information here. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these facts here. First of all, less polygons equals faster performance. Okay. However, more polygons equals more details on your models. Okay. So there's kind of a delicate balance that an artist is going to need to do in order to create something that runs okay and runs smoothly and also looks good. Okay. So we don't want something that looks too flat. A lot of detail can come from other places like textures. We're not going to dive too deeply into that, but I am going to give an example of what that looks like today. And another thing that we want to talk about that also affects the general render budget is effects, lights, and other doohickeys, which is a technical term that I made up. And those things will also equal more slowdown. So it's not necessarily the polygons that are the only things that are going to count towards your performance. Let's continue. The most important thing that I find is the communication between artists and developers. Okay, a lot of times I've had artists come up to me and they've said to me, well, I don't know how many polygons I have, what's my limit? Like, I don't know what my budget is. And, I'll say to them, okay, well, who's your developer? And they need to tell you that. So first of all, for artists, or let's start with developers. First of all, developers need to understand the technological limits. So the question there is, where am I outputting to? Am I outputting to a desktop? Am I outputting to mobile? How many assets am I expecting there to be? Is there going to be, like a main character and several characters that we're not going to see very much? And can I spend more polygons here and less there? And what's my overall limit? Also, the developers need to say where else the budget is going to be spent. They need to know all these other things. And if they don't know, they can always look it up. There are resources online for finding the different devices and what they can take. And for artists, something that's very important that I see is overlooked a lot is that they don't take into account engine conversion. What this means is when you're working inside of let's say Blender, because that's what we're talking about today, you can create a model that's 2,000 polygons. But when you put it into Unity, for example, is going to automatically turn all of those polygons into triangles or tris. And that's going to create more of a poly count, okay? Those count as more. So it will be really 4,000. So this is something to take into account. And you can always set your 3D program to tell you what your triangle count will be. And another rule of thumb is less is always better. If you don't need to be putting extra polygons in there, if it's not helping the shape of your character or fleshing out certain details, or if that detail could be done with a texture, that's better. Do it with that texture. Don't put in more just because you can. So now I want to talk a little bit about the different file types that we'll see, both as artists and as developers. Let's say you're a programmer who's creating a game, you don't have an artist, but you want to download 3D models off the internet. And let's say that you're an artist and you want to output your models for the game or for your developer. So these are the two basic outputs that you're going to create when you're exporting a model, okay? So you have FBXs and OBJs. So an FBX contains a lot of goodness. What do I mean by that? It contains the model, it contains texture data. So if you've got color and you've got normal maps, which is something that creates extra detail, and if you've got a rig and you've got animations, all of those things will be baked or embedded inside of that file. One of the cons of using this kind of file is that there are more chances for issues. And what I mean by that is that it contains a lot of things, and sometimes in the process of moving it from one program to another, you might lose some of that data. Or, I created an FBX inside of Blender, and there's another artist who's working for us, and they are working in Maya. They won't be able to bring that FBX in fully because there are certain features that are unique to Blender that don't exist inside of Maya. So there's a little bit of a toss-up here. However, we usually work with FBXs because we do want to get as much information in there as possible. Now, OBJs are a much simpler form of file output. They very easily import into most programs. I've yet to come across a program that doesn't know how to import an OBJ, be it a game engine, Maya, or ZBrush, or any of the other 3D programs. They usually know how to import them. However, a con is that the goodies aren't really in there. You don't have the texture data, you don't have the UV data, you don't have any of those things that you worked so hard to create and that you really want to get in there. So what I would say is that depending on the situation, you'll want to only import an OBJ when you're starting just from the model. When you don't have textures and you don't have a rig, and you're only interested in the model, then use an OBJ. Most of the time, we use FBXs though. Okay, you can look this up. There's tons of information on this online. Before we get to demoing, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the resources that you can use as both animators and developers that you can use to get 3D models and animations and all sorts of goodies. So Blend Swap, for those who are using Blender, will give you a .blend file, which is the file that can be opened with Blender. And you just have to check the licenses on the model before you use them. Hang on, I'm just going to sip me some water over here. Thank you very much. So there is a link that I will post for those who are interested to the different licenses and what they mean. And we're also going to have a little bit of a look at the website so that we know what I'm talking about. TurboSquid is also a great place to download models. There you can also see whether there are textures in what you're downloading. You can choose what kind of format you're getting, FBX, OBJ. Mixamo, I'm going to do a little demo for you. You can animate your models. And Texture Haven is a great resource for high-quality textures, and they're free. So why wouldn't you use it? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Mixamo. So I'm a programmer. I've just downloaded this model. And what am I supposed to do with this now? I'm not going to have it in T-pose the whole time, with its arms up looking a little bit weird. So first of all, Mixamo is a free service. You just have to have an Adobe ID. And it has some very cool tools. It has a relatively successful auto-rigger. If you bring in just a model, an OBJ or an FBX that only has the model in it, it will prompt you to place points on your model and say, these are where the hands are, these are where the ankles are, and so on. And it's usually quite on the mark. It also accepts pre-rigged models, which is what I'm going to be demonstrating with. And it has a respectable library of animations, and you can just download them and put them in your game. So now I want to give a little bit of a demo of what I'm talking about here. So let's start, first of all, with talking about one of the first things that I spoke about, which is poly count. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between high poly and low poly. Here, on the surface of things, we're looking at a model that looks exactly the same, but really this one on the left is high poly, and the one on the right is low poly. And I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by that. When you look over here, you can see that on the left we have a lot of information. This is 33,000 polygons, which converts into about 67,000 tries. That's what Blender told me. Blender told me what it said in its little bar down here. And I'm also going to explain how we use this program too. So don't fret. And over here we have a 2,000 polygon model, which it's holding all of this data really nicely. And all of this detail is achieved with a texture. And that's something that you can download if you've got like a model that you found online and it's got all those details. It'll come with the textures. Hopefully when you import the FBX, it'll also hold that data in there, but it usually comes with the textures and you can import them in and put them on your model. So that's number one. The next question is, how do I import my stuff? So first of all, I'm going to give just a little bit of an overview of how we're going to navigate Blender and the 3D viewport here. I'm not going to go over everything. This isn't a Blender lesson, but just so that we can, hit the ground running, as it were. We're going to use our middle mouse button to orbit the camera around the scene. We're going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan, and Control and Shift to zoom. Okay, you also have these exact same controls on the right here. Okay, and that's about it. You select with the left mouse button, and that's all we're going to need for this demonstration. So I'm going to come up to File, and I'm going to go to Import. And as you can see, if I don't lose it, we're going to have all of these different file types. We're looking for FBX and OBJ. Okay, so I can import my OBJ, which I prepared ahead of time. And here we go. Here's my model. Okay, it doesn't have any textures on it. We can see that it's low poly. And in the game engine, we're going to see how we put the textures on, and we're going to get some of that beautiful detail in there. Okay, if I press Tab while looking at the model, it's going to take me into edit mode. And here I can see what is known as the wireframe, or all of the polygons, so that I can edit them. If I see that I have an edge that I don't need, I can go in there, I can select it, and I can press X and dissolve edges. Now, this is all documented in the Blender manual. You can also find it online. There are tons and tons of tutorials and resources for this, so that's why I'm just sort of giving you a quick flyby. But you can definitely bring a model in from BlendSwap, from TurboSquid, or any of the other resources. Sketchfab is one that I haven't mentioned. And you can bring them in here, and you can start editing your models and bringing them down to the poly count that you need. Okay, so that's number one. I can also import, oh, that's creepy. I can also import an FBX. Same deal. Okay, and it's giving me all this stuff, only I have a little bit more data in here, which we won't really go into, but I can see that there's a UV map on this model, and other things that I swear there's tons and tons of tutorials for this. So if anything made you go, huh, there are answers. Okay, fantastic. Now I've got my model and I want to export this. I'm happy with how it is. I want to put it into my game engine. So first of all, I'm going to select everything. I'm going to go to File, and instead of Import, I'm going to go to Export, and I'm going to choose FBX. And I already have one over here, so I'm not going to bother. But if you're only selecting several objects in the scene, let's say there's more than just this head and these eyes, I would select Selected Objects. If you have a camera and other things, you can always select them. At this point, we're only really bringing in a mesh, but I'm going to select all of them anyway, just as if we were. And you see that you can turn them on and off. Yeah, let's move on. I'm going to open up Unity. And here I've opened up their sample scene. If you download Unity from the Unity Hub, you open the latest version of Unity, and they can give you a sample scene using the lightweight render pipeline. What I've done is I've basically turned off some of these props, and we're just looking at an empty scene here with some light probes. So I already imported the elf, and I set up a folder system. Just very quickly, if you want to create folders, you go down here to your project and right-click, create folder right at the top there. Okay, so I've created a folder called elf. My FBX is in here, and I'm going to drag it into the scene. And here it is. It's pulled it in. It's looking pretty good. Now, if I want to pan the camera, I'm going to press the middle mouse button. And if I want to orbit around my object, I'm going to Alt and left click. Okay, fantastic. Zooming I can do with the mouse wheel, just for the protocol here, for the record. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to try and put my textures on here so that I can get some of that information in there. So I've created these two different folders here. I've created a material, and I've called it skin. Now how I did that was I just right-clicked, again, create and material, created it, and I gave it a name. I'm going to drag this onto my model. Okay, fantastic. So we can see here that we just have this very dull base color gray. And if I click on this little circle here, and I click on base map circle, I'm going to search for my color data here. Okay, that's the paint data. So we can see that very nicely. It's a little bit dark. I'll raise this up to white. Is that going to make a difference? Fantastic. Okay, so that's a little bit more like it. Now I'm going to bring in my normal map, which is my height data. Okay, my detail data. And instead of clicking on this little circle here, another thing that I can do is I can go in and I can just, I can lock this panel over here so that when I click on something else, it doesn't disappear. I'm going to go into my textures. I'm going to drag this just straight in. Okay, and now we should be seeing some of that data there, and I don't know why we're not. It's weird. I swear I tried this before and it worked perfectly. Very odd. What? All right, never mind. At the end of the day, you drag your things in here, and what you should be seeing is exactly what we were seeing over here. This model right here is exactly the same one, and it has this normal map data on it. It doesn't have all of those polygons. You can see that the information, the pores on the face, the wrinkles, all of those folds, the fat, all of that stuff, that's all there in the texture. It's not there in polygon form. Okay, we're not seeing a high poly sculpt like we are here on this one on the left. Okay, and that's it. I want to give as a last kind of demonstration here, I do want to talk a little bit about Mixamo, mixamo.com. Here is the resource for getting all of your animations. So basically, you're going to receive a little panel here on the right. You can upload a character. You downloaded it online. You can import an FBX or an OBJ or a zip file. I already chose my character. It's this little engineer, and I dropped it in. He already has a rig. And then all you have to do is just search for something. Let's look for something simple like a run. Maybe just run will be good. And let's choose, that one's a little goofy. Let's choose this one. And you can see that the character is now running. I can tell it that I want it to run in place, which just creates this run cycle. I can check it from all the different angles to make sure that everything's working okay. I can change how fast this is going and how much effort he's putting in there. I can slow him down. He's a little bit fat. He's huffing a little bit. I can widen the character's arm space. Okay, and there are all these different settings that you can play with. And then at the end, you just do download, and you can choose what format. You can choose FBX. You can do FBX for Unity, which I personally have not really found any difference in them. But you'll notice that a .obj is not an option here because an obj cannot hold animation data. So that's it. I'm going to open the floor up for questions, but I am going to have to close the recording for that. So I'm going to stop that, and then I'll be able to hear.